G'day everyone and welcome to On the Outer. I'm Gus and I'm here with my co-host, Tom.
Thank you, Gus. What a thrill to be back for season 2022 and people can see us now. So previously, if anyone had doubted how attractive we were as well as how intelligent when it comes to the football sphere, they can put that concern to bed. And you've had a big off-season, Gus. You've moved up to Canberra. So the question on everyone's lips, have you ran into Jack Steele's parents yet?
Well, not to my knowledge. I have a couple of times walked around the street yelling out Steely, hoping to get a response, but it didn't go down as well as I'd hoped, Tom.
Yeah, right.
But leaving that aside, today we're going to have a look at the 9 clubs out of the 18-club AFL team. We're going to pull them out of a hat, as has become a classic pre-season tradition here on the Outer. And give a bit of a rundown on how they're looking for season 2022. Whether Lemons, our inside-outer co-host and on our sister pod, its prediction of Essendon winning the premiership is true, Tom, and whether Richmond are remaining in crisis. We'll see if those things come up today.
All right. Well, I've got no doubt there'll be something along those lines. Of course, if you want to give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, that would be much appreciated. We're easily found at On the Outer on all of those platforms. Of course, drop us a line on the email at ontheouter1@gmail.com.
That's right.
And if you have any suggestions for things you'd like to see on the show this year, or any questions, topics you'd like us to tackle, we'd be more than willing to do that. So always enjoy your feedback. Don't forget to give us a rating or a review either. We got some fantastic reviews last season, and we'll continue to push for those again this year. But Gus, let's get into it. So we're going to do 9 teams in this first episode. We'll do the remaining 9 teams next week. So don't crack it if we don't touch on your team today. We will do it next week, unless your team is University. And I've got the hat
might just
here.
leave them out.
I've got the hat here, and I think we may as well kick it off. You happy to get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. Who's it going to be? First up, Gus, and this is a bit of a coincidence, seeing as how they finished bottom of the ladder last year, but we've got North Melbourne to kick us off for our season previews this year. So you can start us off. What are your feelings on how North is shaping up for the season ahead?
I mean, I think North Melbourne have a bunch of young talent, which is great and will be fun to watch. They certainly improved in the back end of last year, which was a bit of a surprise. Normally what we see is young teams kind of drop off, but that didn't really happen to North. They got better. They were better at defending across the ground. They obviously still had drop-off periods during games, which saw them usually eventually lose, but they were a lot more competitive in the second half of the season. We sort of saw a bit of a breakout year from Nick Larkey in particular as a key forward. He was really, really good and looks like I don't know if he's necessarily the number one solution on a premiership team key forward, but he's certainly one of the pieces for a really good team in the future. They brought in Jake Horne-Francis, who's one of the high-level prospects, not just of obviously last year, but in the last few years. He will probably play some midfield and forward, combining with Will Phillips and Tom Powell, the guys they brought in last year. The dude I'm really interested in is Taran Thomas. I'm pretty excited to see whether he can take he sort of started to take the step into just being an elite player, I think, in the back half of last year as well. But the tools that he has, you sort of look at it and you're like, well, what could he become? He's got pretty much all of the traits. Could he be one of those elite mid forwards that we know are the best players in the competition at the moment? With all that positive stuff being said, they're still not going to be very good. They're very young. Ben Cunnington, we don't really know what's going on with him. Todd Goldstein's another year out. They've brought in Callum Coleman-Jones with the promise that he can play ruck, whether or not that's going to happen straight away. But there's probably going to be a bit of turnover for that. The defence, I think, is still not much, really, especially with Robbie Taran out the door. So I think they're probably still headed for a bottom four finish, but I think there's a chance that they are better over the course of the season than they were last year. So not as many just absolute whitewashes as occurred a few times this season, and a few more close games. And I reckon they'll probably upset someone, probably Essendon, or Essendon playing North to get into the 4 or something and get knocked off, knowing the Bombers. But yeah, they'll probably come out and have 1 or 2 really great performances and knock somebody off, but I don't think that they'll be good over the course of the year.
Yeah, I think that you're pretty much spot on. There's still going to be some pain for North this year, mainly due to the inexperience that they've got in that side. They talked about the night of the long knives situation they had at the end of 2020 with the huge amount of cuts they had to basically the middle tier of their list in terms of age. And then you look at last year, they've kind of done it again. Finishing 2021, these are their outs: Taylor Garner, Connor Menadue, Dom Tyson, Will Walker, Robbie Tarrant, Sean Atley, Tom Campbell, Trent Dumont. They've done it 2 years in a row where they've basically cut most of their players in the sort of 25 to 28 bracket who aren't walk-up starts to the best 22. And, I can definitely see the merit in doing that because you have more opportunities to play kids, and then you have your senior core guys like Goldstein, Cunnington. Obviously, they've brought in Greenwood, who's probably going to play a lot of the midfield time that Cunnington would have played this year. But at the same time, it does test your depth. So that's why I think we saw some of those blowouts last year. I think in terms of the long-term build, I think they've actually got most of their positions filled. In terms of the quality through the midfield, they've got their linchpins in McKay and Larkey forward and back. So I think they're on the right track. I've still kind of got them, to me, there's sort of a bottom 5 this year who I basically don't think can make finals, and then another 13 teams who I could see making it if things went right for them. So I don't have them in that group. I've got them in the bottom 5 again, but I think in terms of the long term, they're probably ahead of the other 4 sides in terms of their list build and their rebuild. So I think it'll be a season of relative positivity because expectations are still going to be low, and I think they're going to be a competitive side. But yeah, they're not quite ready to take that next step. I think a player to watch this year will be Jai Simpkin. I'm expecting a huge year from him. He finished the second half of the season in exceptional form, and I think he could be one that could potentially push for an All-Australian midfield spot this year. Ooh. I think he's a very, very high-quality player and does it on the inside and outside, which is always what catches the eyes of the selectors.
All right, Tom, should we pull out another team? Your
Let's
Abraham
do it.
Lincoln hat.
Whip out the magic. That's the good thing about this hat is because it's always honest. There's no deceit or funny business going on here. So I'll just pull out a different piece of paper. And on this card, I've got the Gold Coast Suns, who another team that finished low down the ladder last year, as they have every year in their existence, except for one, and even that they failed to make the 8. So, look, a lot of talk about the Suns in the preseason is centred around Ben King, which is it's tragic. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It's tragic for multiple reasons because not only is it does it affect the Suns' win and loss record this year, but at least 2 people's jobs, being Stuart Dew and Ben King, could very, very likely be affected by this injury. Who's to say whether or not Ben King playing or missing the year will affect his decision to come home or not at the end of the season? But I don't think it could help. It's probably either neutral or negative. And, Stewie Dew, he's really under the pump, as we know. But I think the issue with the Suns is with King missing, can they scrounge the 12 to 14 goals they need to win most weeks? That's probably unlikely. I think that they will have games, obviously, where they're going to, they showed last year they have good days and they will continue to have good days. But without King there, I don't think the forward line is strong enough. They're going to rely a lot on guys like Sexton to kick goals, and we've seen in the past he's not necessarily a favourite of Stewie Jews either. So that's the main issue for me. The midfield's starting to look okay. Took Miller's obviously an absolute gun. Rowell and Anderson will be better again, and hopefully we see more footy out of Rowell this year. The backline's pretty good. Like, Sam Collins is a high-quality defender. They've got Charlie Ballard back there who's good, and
Will Powell.
Will Powell off half-back, yeah. So, the pieces are there, but the forward line to me is just too thin, and I just don't see how they're going to get the 12 to 14 goals without King there. So it's disappointing to have them ranked so low again. I think most of the footy world would like to see them improve, but I'm not quite sure that circumstances are going to fall their way.
Well, with Ben King, they were a bottom 3 forward line of the competition, probably.
Yeah.
Like, that's with one of the bright young stars of the competition. Without him, I think they're clearly the worst. They don't have...
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can really make an argument that they've got an above-average player in that forward line without King down there. And that's harsh to say, but I think it's just the reality.
It's true. Unless, Lukosius isn't an above-average forward yet. He's an above-average player.
Yeah.
So.
I was thinking that there's some options, I suppose, to throw them around. Maybe Isaac Rankin comes back into the side and capitalises on some of that talent. Maybe Lukosius does go to the forward line, which is where he was drafted as. He was drafted as a sort of mid to tall forward. Neither of them have shown that they can do that. But I think you're right in saying I think it's a massive negative in terms of King's contract. And let's be completely honest, this is the overriding story. Ben King's contract, obviously those other 2 guys I just mentioned, their contracts, Stuart Dew with Alistair Clarkson floating around out there. The story is not going to be, unless they start winning a bunch of games, and you and I can't really see that happening, I don't think. The story is going to be who signs and who doesn't sign. And the best way to get a player to sign a contract extension is to win games. And as you say, it's going to be real hard to do that without Ben King. So, yeah, I think, and it's a shame because, as you say, the midfield is starting to look quite nice. Rowell and Anderson, obviously, looking good. Elijah Hollins is apparently looking pretty good in the preseason. The defence is solid enough. It doesn't probably have quite, it's probably missing a little bit of star factor in the defence, but they've got very good, solid players. They're good enough to be fine, like a fine team in defence. The midfield could have a lot of stars. It's just the forward line is not going to be effective enough, I don't think, to kick enough winning scores. I think it's going to be one of those seasons where, as you say, they're probably going to beat a couple of good teams, but those 3 guys may well walk out at the end. And then where are we left? Are we left with Rowell and Anderson being out of contract at the end of next year as well? We could be looking at the shutting down or the shifting of the Suns, really. Unless they can convince Clarkson to go up there, and that would be a massive get, of course.
I still think that the shutting down or the shifting of the Suns is another decade of, bottom 4 finishes away. I just don't think the AFL is going to pack it in this soon into the experiment, despite what lots of people call for. But I think there's 2 things for me this year that the Suns that I think will be signs of a really positive year. One is obviously King re-signing, which, I think is a possibility. There's certainly every chance that he does go home, but it's not a foregone conclusion by any stretch. And the other thing is to make Metricon a bit of a fortress. If they can really make it hard for teams to travel there, it's not seen as we've got Gold Coast on the fixture. We're getting it's a win.
Yeah.
If they're playing in Metricon, you want to make it hard for teams to go there. And if they can win, 8 home games this year and pinch 1 or 2 away games, then I think that would be a good year for them. But yeah, if Alistair Clarkson wants the job, nothing short of a premiership or a grand final appearance is probably going to save Stewie Jew.
No,
unfortunately.
I think he's a very good chance to get the job because they'll just offer him so much money that it will be almost impossible to say no. He'll get money thrown in from every angle that the AFL can possibly conceptualise of getting money thrown in, which may or may not count in the soft cap. but they'll get him up there if they can. And I think that will. I mean, if Clarko goes up there, I think Ben King goes from what I would see as being like 80% chance to leave. I think that goes to a 50-50, like really fast.
Yep, but that's fair call.
But we'll see if he may make his decision before that, or he might have already made his decision. Like Ben King could have. The thing that I always think is interesting when people say, "Oh, he's not going to leave," or "Why would he leave?" or blah blah blah. I mean, why would he leave? Everyone knows why he would leave. But Ben King could have ended this conversation at any time over the last 12 months. He could have signed an extension. He was extension eligible. He could have signed an extension at any point. The fact that he hasn't shows that at the very least he's not convinced that the Suns is his future. And like, there's no argument that you can make like, oh, he would have made more money or whatever. The Suns are going to pay Ben King whatever he wants to stay. Like, that's just going to be, they'll back the Brinks truck up and dump all the cash in his front yard if he wants. So yeah, he could have ended it. He hasn't, and therefore it will continue to be a conversation for the whole season. But anyway, Tom, let's move on to the next club.
All right, back into the hat of truth and purity. We have...
I know you're such a big fan of Abraham Lincoln. I didn't actually know that about you, Tom.
Free the slaves, mate. Come on. All right, we're going to look at the Hawks next.
Ooh.
So...
There's a few cellar dwellers here, Tom.
Yeah, well, who knows? Maybe it'll improve as we go on. It's hard to say what the hat will produce. But Hawks, Gus, I'll let you kick this one off. Your old sparring partners.
Look, I think the Hawks are bad. There's no question about that. I was thinking about this the other day, just as, preparing for this show and trying to think about like what there was to say about the Hawks. They're real boring. Like, that's the main thing I think about Hawthorn. Even their good players are completely or almost completely lacking in like creativity and flair. There's really Chad Wingard, who I think had a pretty good year last year, but is still way below what he was in what has at this stage been his prime when he was like 22. Yeah. There's James Sicily, who's obviously coming back from an ACL and a bunch of injuries and the umpires hate, so he never really gets to show his flair. And then, I don't know, like Jath.
Well, Jath's the big one.
Yeah, of course. But like he's 21 or something. Like there's Will Day, I guess, who's got some of those qualities, who's flashed some of those qualities. But other than that, like they're really good players. James Warple, Jaeger O'Meara, Tom Mitchell. Like, can you think of any more vanilla trio of like your best three midfielders in the AFL? Like they are. And they're good players, but they are not players that can turn games by acts of brilliance. They are simply solid midfielders, and they don't have anybody in the forward line who can really do that unless Wingard's playing up there. They don't really have anyone in defence who can do that. They're just a lot of good ordinary players, and that is what happens when you trade out draft picks over and over and over again. But it also means that when that comes home to roost, you are looking at a situation where you're lacking in star power. And I think, I think there's probably, for me, there's two main teams that could win the wooden spoon, and I think this is one of them. This is a clear one of the two.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think that their team on paper is not strong. It's stronger than I thought it was last year. Last year I was quite down on them. I tipped them for the wooden spoon. And then some players showed me that they were better than I thought they were. So guys like Jath, Scrimshaw, Hardwick in the backline all had pretty good years. And then obviously, we know that Mitchell and O'Meara are high-quality midfielders already, but guys like Kaczynski had a a good year that showed he has potential. Dylan Moore up forward. So there were people that emerged last year as players that I think improved their standing a little bit in the game and at the club, but I still think that they're lacking, quality across the board. Aside from that sort of small, medium defender position, where they do look quite good, they have a lot of depth in that position, there isn't really a line in which you'd say they're strong. I think they'll back Mitch Lewis to be their sort of main man up forward this year. Cosy will obviously play down there as well, but Lewis has, from all reports, had a really strong preseason, so we'll see how that goes. It's taken him a few years to settle in. He's still young, but he's been in and out of the side for probably 3 or 4 seasons now. So they'll be looking for him to be the number one target coming out of the goal square. Don't really think he's capable of kicking, more than 40 or so goals. So, yeah, I think that the issue with Hawthorn that we'll be keeping a watch on this year is how they blend the old and the new. There's a lot of pressure on Sam Mitchell because he was installed in place of possibly the greatest coach of all time.
Yeah, he's not getting a honeymoon period. He's not getting a honeymoon period at all, is he?
It's done.
Yeah.
And they're basically at ground zero because they haven't had, they have Denver Granger Barras, who looks like a likely prospect, but they don't have really, really high draft picks in their key positions. Josh Ward should play a lot of footy next year in the midfield, but there's not many of them. So I think that they, again, like Gold Coast, they'll have some good wins. I think Sam Mitchell will instill in them a good fighting quality that will probably limit the margins, similar to what Clarkson did last year. They'll probably look to defend first, as rebuilding teams often do. But, yeah, I don't see them getting out of that bottom 5 that I mentioned before. And, is there issues with Tom Mitchell, O'Meara, Wingard? They were shopped around.
Very publicly shopped, yeah.
Yeah, there's no sort of way around that. That did happen. Obviously, they're professional players. They get on with it. They come back to the club and they get on with it. But I'm interested to see how Mitchell structures this side up, whether he does start to float different guys through the midfield in those positions because he wants his brand and his own stamp on the team, and whether those guys who were part of Clarko's team find themselves a little bit on the outer. So that's my watch for Hawthorn this year.
I guess the only other quick thing, I think they're really going to struggle in the ruck because it's either big boy or a bunch of project guys who are either too old or too young. And the other thing is, how awesome is it to see Hawthorn sucking for a while? It's great. In your face, Hawthorn.
All right, back to the hat.
Shall we just intro the fact that Lemons is now our producer and is also on the show at the moment, Tom?
Yeah, well, while I search through this multitude of different slips of paper, you can talk.
Yeah, do you want to say g'day, Lemons, to the listeners?
G'day. Thanks for having me on. I'm very much looking forward to producing the show this year. I'm going to learn a lot more about footy than just the 2000 Premiership Bombers side, which is all I really know about it.
That's all you need to know, mate. And of course, Lemons, you are the co-host of Inside Outer on the Outer's sister podcast. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I am. We're doing that once a week. So season's ramping up, getting towards the playoffs now. So if you're interested in NBA basketball, please give that a listen.
All right, Lemons, thank you. We'll continue on with the show then, Tom. Who's next on our list of hat games?
Thanks, Lemons. Back to your hole. We've got next the Tigers. I think one of the more
in crisis
difficult teams to assess going into this season because there's a lot of differing opinions on where Richmond are at. A lot of optimism, people predicting they might just bounce straight back. Others, sort of predicting that the run is over. And I can definitely see either side of that argument. I can see them finishing around the same position as they were last year, sort of 12th, maybe, top half of the bottom 8. It's not that much of a stretch to see them back up in the top 4 either. It's not a huge imagination to imagine that happening. So really interesting watch this year, Richmond. I think the main issue I have with regard to, the bounce back effect that people are talking about is that there's a lot of teams to overtake from 12th. Like they have to, it's not like they just finished 9th and, missed out on percentage. They have to overtake quite a few teams to actually get back to contention again. And I don't think that that's an easy thing to do, especially because, well, one thing is that there are a lot of teams who improved last year and you could rightly expect that they'll continue to improve. But also time marches on. Like it's not Richmond's competition anymore. It's Melbourne's competition now. And then you got the Western Bulldogs and you got the Brisbane Lions who I think, will be right up there again as well. So look, I think that there's every chance Richmond are a much better side than they were last year and that they do compete for a top 4, top 8 spot. But I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at all. I think that they're going to have a lot of things go right where a lot of things went wrong last year. And just based on, age demographic profile, I've kind of, it's hard for me to kind of judge because I'm emotionally invested, but I'm not at all, expecting a barnstorming return to the 8. I think it could happen, but I also think it's just as likely that they're about where they were last year as well.
Yeah, I mean, I probably lean towards that second one than them being in that range that they were last year again. I think the other side of this is those injuries are starting to mount up on quite important players. Like we're seeing dudes like Dion Prestia, Sheds, guys who are a big part of their really good teams, just starting to struggle to play any games, let alone, I mean, Dion Prestia has always been a bit injury prone, but you can still count on him for like 15, 16 games and then to play finals. Now he's playing 8, and I'm not sure if the talent in the kind of 22 to 26 age group is good enough to really lift that back up to where they might be able to compete for a premiership. Like, as you say, there's teams that have gone past them. There's younger teams that have gone past them. So what it would need for Richmond to be a contender is for a bunch of those younger teams to plateau or regress and Richmond to, improve internally enough with those young guys to get back up to that level at the same time. And I think I just find that really hard to believe that I mean, it obviously could, but I find it hard to believe that it will happen enough times, like enough teams will do that for it to work for the Tigers. I think there'll still be a dangerous opponent. Like there'll certainly be a team that you don't particularly want to play, especially because they have guys like Dustin Martin and Jack Riewoldt still running around who still look good. But I just don't think that they have. I just don't think they have enough middle tier talent on the list at the moment that can take the step to being top tier talent to make them return to premiership contention. And I don't think that a few high draft picks that they had this year are going to be enough to kind of make that happen. A bunch of 18-year-old kids don't push you to a premiership. They might make you more exciting and more fun to watch, and they might push you a couple of spots up, but they don't swing you from 12th to a flag. Maybe in a few years, but not in one.
Yeah. No, I think that I disagree slightly on the fact that I don't think Richmond need... there is going to be a drop-off because of that lack of middle-tier talent. But I don't think to win a premiership this year or to contend for top 4, Richmond need a lift from their middle-tier talent. What they need is their best players to play full seasons and to play to their best of capacity.
Is that really going to happen? I mean, is Cochin ever going to be Cochin of 3 years ago?
It might not happen, but that's how they're going to win the flag this year or compete. And at the moment, there is, I think Jack Graham has some hamstring tightness, and he's the only player unavailable. Prestia and Edwards have done every session and more training than they've done in years. So, it will require a luck and things to go right, and for them to get their best 22 to 25 players on the park every week. But I think that's how they'll do it. I'm not expecting much improvement from the middle tier because, as you say, it's just not really there in terms of quality. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting watch.
They'll be a fun team as well. Like, they're always kind of fun to watch. I think as well, I'm quite intrigued to see how Noah Bolter plays this season. I think he's got just those athletic traits that make him a really interesting guy at both ends of the ground, maybe even in the ruck at times. So coming back from his injury, I'm intrigued to see what kind of leap that he can make, because I think he, along with Shai Bolton, are sort of the two dudes that are in that next group who have the star potential, if you want, more than any of them. So I'm keen to see how he goes this season.
Yeah, potentially how they fit in Rewalt, Lynch, and Curvis, Soldo, and Bolter as forward rucks.
And Sampson.
That'll be weird. And big Ryan Sampson. Yeah. All right, should we move on? I'll delve back in here. And it's the Saints.
This is a good one,
Gus. So a team, I suppose, not as close to your heart as other teams, but closer than most. So what have you got to say about the Saints this year?
I mean, I think the Saints are quite an interesting team because, as we've sort of talked about for a long time, they still remain... they feel still like they've got a lot of B-plus talent with not a lot of A-plus talent, but I'm not quite sure. I think in Max King, Hunter Clark, Jade Gresham is apparently back and playing pretty well. There's whispers about Dan Hanbury's health. I don't know how much we can put stock in that, Tom, but there are whispers. I think if those guys, along with the obvious superstar in Jack Steele, can all play consistent footy, and Max King in particular takes the step that we all, I think that he will inevitably take eventually, whether it's this year or next year, into stardom. Now, look, they're not going to win a premiership, but they could win a final. I think they could. They won a final 2 years ago. Like, it's not any craziness at all to say that they could come out and win a final this year. I think that they had a shocking season last year with injury and just poor performance, stuff like that. I'm interested to see kind of how they structure up, what they do with Brad Hill, whether or not he's going to go to half back again and not be any good again, to put it bluntly. I'm interested to see how Paddy Ryder goes this season, whether or not he can kind of continue what he's been doing, which is just defying age, or not defying age, like defying age at centre bounces and ruck hitouts, and then not defying age basically everywhere else because he's too tired to run around. But yeah, I think this team is one of the big, could finish between 5th and 14th. You know, like they could finish. There's a big gap between St Kilda's finished in this season, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Huge gap between. I think they're kind of in a similar boat to Richmond in that they need to overtake probably maybe a couple too many sides for me to see them bursting back into the 8, and I don't think they have the top tier talent that Richmond have at their disposal to do that. I can't remember a team that has this many B graders in it. Like you look at the best 22, like the side, and it's still a pretty decent side, but that's all it is. It's just decent. You know, they got Wilkie down back, Howard, they're good players. They got, Sinclair had a really good year. They got Brad Crouch, Steele, Zach Jones through the middle. Zach Jones, if he's fit, like
superstar. Steele's
a superstar, one of the best players in the league. But beyond that, like,
but that's what I'm saying about Clark, Hunter Clark, Max King, and potentially Jade Gresham. Like, those are the guys that I'm not saying that they are going to, but they have the potential to jump into that star category. And then suddenly you're looking at a really interesting team where you've got a lot of good players and you've got that star talent in there. Whether or not it happens is another another question, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're a little, if they did get, marked improvement out of those guys that you mentioned, then that's wonderful result. It's probably unlikely that more than one or two of them would break out in that way. Saints are suffering because they didn't make the most of their low ladder positions that they had for, a few years after their successful or relatively successful period. They should have, like, Jack Billings is a good player. He's a very good player, but he could be. But that didn't happen. McCartan didn't happen. Even look at Caulfield and Clark, 2 picks in the top 10. They're not guns.
No,
Caulfield's not going to play, which is sad. And Clark, he's a good player, but he's not a gun. So
I still think Hunter Clark could be a gun. I'm not giving up on Hunter Clark.
He still could be, but he's not. He's not yet.
Whereas Aaron Norton was picked directly. After that. But they just haven't. They just didn't make the most of that time down the bottom. And when you have a period down the bottom, which sucks in the first place, but then you don't capitalize on it by improving your list in a really meaningful way, then a couple of years later it comes back to you. And this is, I think, what's happened to them last year. Look, as we saw in 2020, they're a good enough side to, if everything goes right and it clicks, for them to play finals. And they've still got much of the same core group as they did that year. But I'm not seeing like a huge marked improvement from players that will necessarily catapult them further up the ladder than where they were in 2020. And I just don't quite see them sneaking into the 8 again this year. I think they'll be around the same mark, unfortunately. Yeah, I probably agree. I don't think that they'll make the 8. I just think that they could, which is, I mean, as I said, the variance between these guys, this team is just huge. So who knows? As I said, Max King, one of my favourite players to watch. I am excited to see what he comes out with this year. We had a source at the Carlton St Kilda practice match, Tom, and described Max King as a juggernaut this season, so look out for that.
Yeah, also at the Pracky match, Josh Battle playing as a sort of a permanent intercept defender good. After having been thrown around a lot of his career. I think that's a good move. With you got Howard to play on the big dogs, and then Battle is kind of the centre half back. I think that's a better setup than they've had in the last few years.
Sounds bloody beautiful. Tipping for the top 4.
Top 4 for the Saints. All right. We are going to dip into the hat again. And, well, speaking of top 4, we've got the Bombers here, Gus.
1.
So, I'll start this one. I think definitely one of the hype teams of the pre-season, based on the end of the season last year, and then obviously quite a fit list with a lot of track watchers particularly impressed with some of the midfield movement they've been doing, and certainly against the Bulldogs, I thought they were one of the most impressive teams in those scratch matches, which obviously you can't put a huge stake in, but they were very impressive. I think the midfield looks good. It's deep now. It's probably deeper than it's been
ever.
For what, 15, 20
years? I think this is a deeper midfield than the one that won the premiership in 2000. As an overall midfield, it is.
Yeah, so that's good. It's well balanced as well. They've got, particularly with Shield, I know he has his detractors, but in terms of injection of pace through that midfield, he's probably the guy there that provides that. So him back will be good. Obviously, the concern is key position depth, especially up forward. I don't think they need bags out of Peter Wright or Harry Jones to be a good team. They can provide a contest and they can get goals from the midfield and smalls, but if they really struggle or if they get injured, there's not a lot of guys to come in there and kind of take that role, especially when you've got question marks on Tipping Woody and Stringer.
Well, Stringer has said today that he'll play round 1.
So that's good. That's a huge plus. But he's obviously a guy that needs a really strong preseason, so missing those few weeks might hurt him. But he's going to have a good year. So I think Essendon are in a unique position because they should be top 6. I reckon that's a fair assessment, and I reckon they'll be around that mark. But it's also not a disaster if they don't improve on last year, because they improved so much last year and were way beyond expectations. If they're around that mark again, or even if they drop back a tiny bit, I don't think it's going to be a disaster. They've got a lot of optimism. They've got a lot of youth. They've got an absolute gun intercept defender in Ridley, who I think is an absolute star of the comp. The only issue is last year, I think I saw today, they were 16th without the footy across the season last year, which they need to improve a lot, and they're not going to get much further than they were last year unless they get that into kind of single figures.
The two big things are that, and then they were 13th in contested possession differential, so very good. Essendon, and like first in scoring from stoppage as well, or second or something like that. So outstanding at stoppage, but then the secondary and tertiary contests away from that stoppage were just no good. And part of that is because they were the second or third youngest team in the competition last year. Like, they were an extremely young, very inexperienced side, playing a lot of dudes who were, you know, in their early teens or late teens, not early teens, that'd be weird, late teens or early 20s. And the hope is that, you know, you add some size and those sorts of things will come down. You mentioned that practice game against the Bulldogs. Archie Perkins was the one that stood out for me in that game. Obviously Ridley as well, but he, at sort of that high half forward coming up to the contest, just dominated, to be honest, for a dude who's only 20. He's cut the hair already, so he's already sorted his life out.
Getting serious.
Took Pendle's like 8 years to cut off his dreads.
Pendle's had dreads. No one ever forget that. No, I forgot, but no one else should.
I mean, look, as you are with Richmond, I'm far too emotionally invested to like be realistic about this. I hope that we're going to win the premiership, and also think we will win the wooden spoon. Like, that's just the nature of being a fan. But I think objectively they are building something really exciting. Whether that goes anywhere, there's always things that can happen. You need luck to be a good team in the AFL. Like, Sam Drape is a massive thing for us. If he gets injured, we're left with Andrew Phillips and Nick Bryan. Like, you mentioned Peter Wright and Harry Jones. If one of them gets hurt, we're left with 19-year-old Kane Baldwin, who was an SBS selection last year, or the aforementioned Andrew Phillips at full forward. Like, there is a lack of, I suppose, mature depth in those positions. But on the other side of that is, if everything goes right, they could be a really, really exciting team. And I don't think top four is out of the question. I think there's three clear, you mentioned them before, but the Demons, Dogs and Lions are the three clear, outstanding teams, I think. I think that fourth spot is up for grabs, and I think Essendon could be in that conversation for that. As I said, whether or not they are, that's going to be luck and form and a bunch of different other stuff that we'll talk about as we go through the season.
Can I just get your prediction fast forward to the end of the year? Who do you think, all things going well, will be Essendon's leading goal kicker at the end of the season?
I mean, the best case scenario would be that it would be Harry Jones, and he takes that leap into, you know, whatever he's going to be of a 45, 50 goal a season player, maybe more. Whether or not it might be a year early or a year or two early for him to do that, that's also possible. I think the most likely answer is probably Jag Stringer again, because he just if he has these games where he has, 24 possessions, 10 clearances and 5 goals, and that's all she wrote. But I think that the best case scenario would be Harry Jones taking that leap, because I think that changes the complexion of Essendon, if that is the case.
Yeah. I think that's a fair call, and I think that they will probably. I think Stringer's still the most dangerous player around goals for sure, because if you look at the other guys, it's you're not expecting more than
No.
20, 25 goals.
Jake
kind of
Stringer's
thing,
our best player at his best.
Yeah.
It's just whether or not he plays at that level enough for it to be worthwhile.
All right, let's move on then. So back into the hat. Let's just whoa! All right, so we have got Gus. The Sydney Swans had a much improved last year, like the Bombers did. Can they go again? What are your thoughts?
I think another interesting team. Of course, we've said about all of the teams in this middle bracket so far, but it's because you could see teams from fourth to 13th finishing in pretty much any order. Like, it wouldn't be that shocking to see any iteration of that group. Sydney is probably one of the ones along with the Bombers that you would say have one of the highest ceilings. They should definitely be in that conversation for that fourth spot. Although Callum Mills is still not back, he was a massive reason they did take a little bit of a leap last year, moving into the midfield. Lance Franklin, who knows how much they've got left out of them. Tom Papley apparently had a little bit of a hamstring strain in the practice match against GWS. Yeah, so there are already those injury issues creeping in. We know who Isaac Heaney is not exactly the most reliable in terms of his body either. So there are already those problems creeping into the side. That being said, they still have Dane Rampy, Luke Parker, JPK is still somehow running around as an elite inside midfielder. They still have really, really good players, Lloyd. So I think their floor is higher than most other teams in this group too. I think I'd be pretty surprised if they missed the 8, to be honest. And I think top 4 is. I think they and GWS probably have the inside running for that 4th spot in the top 4. If you were going to twist my arm and say who's most likely to finish 4th, they'd be the 2 that I would sort of look at. Again, it comes down to luck a little bit. But what do you reckon? Do you think that's pretty fair?
Look, I loved what the Swans did last year, and I think they have a lot of good young players. But it's similar to Port Adelaide. They have a really good young group. So I'm talking Campbell, Goulden, McDonald, Blakey,
the 1920,
Florent, Warner. And then a really solid older core who we know, like Buddy, Franklin, Josh Kenny, they're all-time greats. But I'm not sure that there's that group in the middle that necessarily is going to see them improve a lot this year.
But Heaney and Mills are in that middle group now. Like, that is the middle group.
Yeah, but they're already
you
stars.
mean players
like,
to lead, to take the lead. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I'm just not convinced. Look, I'm basing this sort of on, I'm looking at the teams from the top 8 last year, and I don't see who's going to miss. Like, there's a lot of teams in there who are either already awesome and are going to continue to be awesome, or are improving, like Sydney, like the Bombers. So I think Sydney are vulnerable because someone's going to drop out. Probably 2 teams are going to drop out, and I'm just not convinced that Sydney have enough natural improvement left in them with this current mid-tier group that they'll actually be able to maintain their spot and not be overtaken. So it sounds pessimistic. It's not. I'm still optimistic about where they're at, and I think that they're going to have a really good team in a couple of years, but I don't know whether their squad in 2022 is going to improve enough to be able to, because you've got to get better. Like, you can't stagnate. You'll miss out. So if they stagnate, they'll miss out. I think if they have a poor run with injuries, like you alluded to, there's already a couple of issues that could hurt them. If they have a really good year with injuries, then I think they'll still probably slot into the 8.
Yeah, their best 22 is good enough, but probably the depth of their list isn't. So, yeah, I think you're right.
Pretty excited to see the McCartan boys down back. I think Paddy was very good in his first hit out against the Giants the other day, and then that I think that's quite likely. They've got Lewis Melican down there, who's sort of been in and out of the side for most of his career.
Your
Dana
man.
Rampy, I think, is much better off as the who's my man?
Lewis Melican is
he?
You love him. You read a poem out to him like last year.
Well, I didn't write it.
Yeah, but you read it out.
Thanks to Damien Bellasone for that one.
Great book.
Yeah, so I think that it's quite likely that Tom and Paddy McCartan are the key pillars in their defence. Round one this year, certainly Tom will be because he's a gun, but I think Paddy could be there too, and that would be pretty cool to see both of them holding down those key position spots. Up forward, I think it's quite an interesting watch because they've got, obviously Buddy's going to play, but then they've got McDonald, Hayden McLean, Tom Hickey, Peter Laddams they brought in. Joel Amardi played a lot of good footy last year as well, and that's before you even factor in Sam Reid, who, it just continues to survive. So there is 6 or 7 guys that could be in the best 22. So I'm going to be pretty interested to see which way John Longmire goes with that, because there's lots of options. I think that McDonald should be invested in, obviously, and Buddy's going to play, and probably Laddams, they brought him across. But there's a bit of depth there. So, yeah, something to keep an eye on.
That confusion between John Longmire and Justin Longmuir is the most you're getting, Freo fans, so suck it up. Also, Lemons, can we drop a I'm a Survivor sting in after Sam Reid's name there, just because he is surviving?
Yeah, I'll get that. I'll get right on that one, Gussie.
Yeah, thanks, mate. All right. Let's hit the hat again, Tom. You're just sitting there staring at me. Let's go.
So we've got 2 more to go for today. 2 more clubs, and we will go back into Lincoln's famous hat. This is actually the hat that he was murdered in. I managed to get a hold. Yeah,
I mean, so what a priceless artifact.
It's been dry cleaned. Brisbane Lions. Now, we've both alluded to this already in the program today, that we think that they are a good chance to contend again this year. I really honestly think that there's not too many holes in their side. Brisbane, they've got one of the best key defenders in the comp in Harris Andrews. I think their forward line is probably the best in the comp. It's certainly up there. That there's not any teams that have an outstanding forward line, because footy's not played that way anymore. But when you look at, Rayner going back into there, plus, Bailey, either of those guys swapping between forward and midfield. Lincoln McCarthy, I think, is a really high caliber small forward, and Charlie Cameron, obviously a star. And then I think Danaher, there's every reason to think he'll be better. McStay, I think, improved a lot, certainly in my eyes last year. I think he's a really solid contributor. And then they'll get Hipwood back. Talking even sort of round 6 or 7.
Saying he could be back even round 4 or 5. I've seen a few ones, so he could be very early on in the season.
Yep. So it's a good, and obviously the midfield we know. So there really isn't too many holes in this team. I think it's a very, very good team on paper, certainly in the top 4 on paper. And look, they've had disappointing final series over the last 3 years, but they have been beaten by the best. Like, you look through it, they've lost to the grand finalists. I think in every occasion that they've played finals last year.
Yeah, they haven't been dropping games to, like elimination finals to the 8th place side or whatever. It's been like, we've actually played against the best team in the competition.
Yeah, they've just been the sort of 3rd to 5th best team.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that they are close. I think that alone is enough indication that they are close. They're a bee's dick away from a premiership. They just need things to go right in the finals, and they need to kick straight in the finals. That's been one of their major issues as well. But, with a full season from a fit and firing Lockie Neal, get Rayner back in there, get Hipwood back in there. Berry, he was awesome in the scratch match the other day as well. So I don't see many holes in the Brisbane Lions squad, and they're certainly not getting too old either. Like, they probably contended ahead of time, to be honest, a few years ago. So
they were. I think that's why we sort of can give them a little bit of a pass for failing in these finals, because really they made that leap 2 years ago where half their core players were 20 or 21, like McCluggage, Berry, Bailey, Rayner, all these guys were just kids. Harris Andrews is still relatively young, Hipwood's still young. So they've got time, they had time. It's now getting to the point where this should be prime. Like, this should be the time where this list is ready to win. Obviously, Lockie Neal, I guess, knocking back interest from Freo or
however that happened,
whatever weird situation happened with them. But he's back. You mentioned it before. They don't have a hole on their list, I don't think. I mean, what do they need? They needed a lockdown small defender, and then they got a guy who, in Starcevich, who could have made the All-Australian team last year. Daniel Rich running off halfback with his lasers. They've got an aggressive winger in Mitch Robinson, who everybody's afraid of because they don't know what he's going to do. I suppose the only thing, is Oscar McInerney good enough as your number one ruckman to take you to that premiership? Maybe. I mean, that's a question mark, I think. But we have seen plenty of teams win without elite ruckman. And I don't think Oscar McInerney is an elite ruckman, but I think he's fine, and I think he can do the job.
I think he's good enough in the hit-outs that he will give them first use. And then I think because they do play that three-pronged attack, Nick Stay's quite a physical guy around the ground that can do that. So it probably works. They've also brought in Darcy Fort, who I know is not a gun by any stretch, but he's a handy backup if things don't work out. So, and then, a bit of talk about positional switches, as there was last year as well.
Yeah, they do this every year.
I don't believe for a second that Lockie Neal's not going to play on ball for 95%
Lockie Neal and
of the
Jared
game.
Lyons are not playing wing and half forward. It's going to happen. That was
No.
Fagan said, we're going to play Harris Andrews at full forward 2 years ago. Harris Andrews has not played a minute of forward in his entire career, I don't think. So
well, he shouldn't, because
he's the best key defender in the competition.
So high hopes for Brizzy this year. The one thing that will really cut them about the final situation is the fact that they keep losing finals at home, and you don't get finals at home all the time. So you need to make the most of them. But they should be playing finals for the next
3 or 4 years.
5 years.
Easily.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. All right, so we're both big on the Brisbane Lions. Now we're going to go back into the hat for our last team today, and just got to
scrape around.
Make sure I don't grab one of the other 9 pieces of paper that's in here for next week. But I've pulled out this one, and it is the Western Bulldogs, Gus, the runners-up. Obviously, a pretty gutting. Well, I mean, there was a lot of positivity in the grand final for the Western Bulldogs up to a certain point, and then the end result is they've been absolutely smoked with one of the 15 minutes. one of the biggest smashings we've seen in the grand. I watched the last quarter and a half of this game again the other day. Just an absolutely pristine example of AFL football. And you can blame the Bulldogs for some of it, because they really dropped off for their pressure. They really struggled to get the ball out of the middle as well, and they didn't change things. The 4 guys in the centre, for such a deep midfield, they kept the 4 same people in the centre square for most of the second half. But on the other hand, it was just perfect footy from Melbourne, and I don't know if any team could have done much about that on the day. The Bulldogs are going to be up there again. There's no reason to think they won't be right up there. I think that the midfield, you got to remember, Treloar and Dunkley missed a lot of footy last year as well, so they didn't have that depth through the mid. Well, they still did, but they didn't have the exquisite depth that we were expecting for that middle part of the year where things get tough and the grounds get stodgy and slow. So I think that'll benefit them if those guys stay fit. I think that the pickup of Tim O'Brien, a little bit of an underrated one over the off-season. I thought that what they really missed was that kind of intercepting but still tall centre-half back. the Aliir kind of example of how good he was for Port last year. I don't know if O'Brien can be an All-Australian, but I certainly think he can fill that need and allow Alex Keith just to worry about the body-on-body stuff. And I think Aaron Norton's about to go nuts. Saw him in the headband the other day. I think that's a sign that he's about to become a superstar. Nah,
I think he's 1 year away.
Keep the headband.
He's a haircut away.
I think he's got that full 1980s vibe going on with his hair and the headband and the big high marks. And I would be very surprised if he doesn't elevate his game even further next year. He's just so confident.
Yeah.
Like he genuinely believes that he is about to mark every single ball that gets kicked on the field, even if he's like 200 meters away. Like he just has every single ball in his hands before it's
kicked. I keep thinking he's going to like jump on a post or something, like to try.
Yeah, he probably will.
I literally, or like I keep when they used to do the games in Ballarat, the Dogs. I don't know if they're doing it again, but that fence is like one of those metal fences, the white picket metal fences.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, is he just going to run up and jump onto that and, like, take the mark running out of bounds because he just wants the ball that bad? Because he's that desperate to mark it in the air that you're just never sure quite what he's going to do. Look, I think Josh Bruce being out for most of this season will hurt. There's still question marks over Tim English. I think even as with Steph Martin in the team, like Tim English was getting beaten up in the practice game by Peter Wright as the backup ruckman against Essendon, and like Peter Wright's a pretty good backup ruckman, but if he can't even be trusted to play those 10, 15 minutes stints, or 10-minute stints or 5-minute stints in the ruck without you just getting slaughtered in the hit-outs. Like, I'm not sure what that means for Tim English going forward generally. Other than that, I think they're pretty complete at the moment. Like, they probably do need another tall forward, but that's hard to find. And Steph Martin in the ruck is a question mark just because of his body. He's like 35 now. But they're so good at winning their own footy that doesn't really matter. It's certainly not going to matter in terms of the home and away season, maybe in a final. I mean, we saw what happened with Max Gawn, Luke Jackson and Track and Oliver just taking the game away from them out of the centre, but it's not going to matter unless they're playing against the absolute elite teams. So, they're going to be awesome again. They'll be a top 2 or 3 side along with the Lions and along with the Demons, I think.
Yeah, and I think Norton can kick, 60-odd goals this year for sure. But the problem being with Bruce going out is that I think Jamara Ugle-Hagan will play, but he's not the same player as Josh Bruce.
I can certainly see what people saw in his junior stuff, the athleticism and stuff, but I don't know whether it's a confidence thing or it's a commitment thing or whatever. And I don't want to be too rough because we've only seen him sort of in a couple of games last year and he's only 19 or 20 or whatever. But, like, he just doesn't look like he's got the pace of the game at all at the moment. And as you say, if he is going to play consistently in place of Bruce, they need him to get up to speed really, really quickly because he's going to need to at least play a role of some description with a goal or two chipping in here and there.
Yeah. I think he's still a little while away, and I think that ultimately he's kind of a Norton, like he's kind of that athletic player who is more similar to Norton, whereas what they need to replace Josh Bruce is a different kind of player.
Underneath the ball kind of marker.
Body on body kind of guy. Yeah, and I don't know if that's his go. I think Shaq will probably play back.
Shaq
and obviously Sam Darcy's not ready to play yet either. So,
well, in that, again, not to keep harking back to that practice match, but it is the last time we saw them play. Like, Matt Guelphy just shoved Josh Shackey off the ball, like, very easily at one point. And I got about 4 messages at once from people watching the game, just being like, "Oh God, look at that! Like, this is a little half-back flanker who's half-forward flanker who's just shoved this key position player off the footy." He's no good.
Yeah, well, I don't know. He's certainly not going to be able to do that role anyway.
I'm talking about Josh Shackey, not.
I know.
I'm not writing off Uglegen by any stretch at this point. I am writing off Josh Shackey.
Shackey's not going to be able to play that Josh Bruce role, and that is the concern for me, is that forward line, the disruption that injury has had. But obviously, Bulldogs, they're a good team. Yeah. They've got one of the best. They're one of the best lists, possibly the best list, really. I mean, it's hard to go past Melbourne, but Dogs just have so many stars, don't they?
It's only going to matter. It's only going to matter in the really big games, like anything else.
But that's also,
of course,
when it matters.
Of course, that's
isn't it?
extremely relevant. But they're going to be a top 2 or 3 side purely based on the basis of how much talent they have outside of that. It's only going to be in the absolute nitty gritty. And by that point, who knows what's happened? Like, Stephen May could have broken his face or been suspended by then. Like, anything could have happened. Anything could happen by the finals. So, yeah, I mean, it is a problem, but it's only going to be a problem that rears its head in very specific circumstances.
Yeah, well, let's hope that Josh Shackey doesn't kick Stephen May in the face and then Stephen May retaliates and throws him out of the MCG, and then he ends up with a broken face and a big long suspension. Anyway, Gus, that's the end of our rollicking run through 9 of the 18 teams. So we'll be back next week to finish off with the other 9, and then we're launching into season 2022. We'll be here every week through the season talking about the games and the other stuff that's going on in the footy, the big stories and all of your favourite segments returning for the season as well. So get keen for that.
Yeah, so as Tom said, if you're enjoying On The Outer, you can hit us up at ontheouter1@gmail.com or follow along on any of our socials. Give us a like, rate, review, subscribe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. That's where you can pick up all of this great video content that we're going to be dealing out for you all this year. The podcast or the show will still be available as a podcast in podcast form, but we're just trying to bring something new and fresh to the viewers. Well, now they're viewers, I guess. They were listeners, but now you're all viewers. But yeah, as Tom said, we'll be back next week and looking forward to the season ahead. Thanks very much for tuning in. Catch you later. Ciao.